Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Looks like we're starting right at the hour. Who's here from the Angela and Vu and Sada amazing keynote? That was incredible. I'm still reeling with all these little nuggets and insights. My name is Isis Krause. I'm with the Philanthropy Together team, and welcome to our second session of the day. How does one's class background impact the Giving Circle experience? I'm so excited to hear this discussion. It's going to be phenomenal. Please note that closed captioning is available and can be enabled at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So don't forget to do that. So many giving circles talk about race and other sort of abilities, yet we don't often talk about class. And so I'm very excited for this conversation because this is a conversation we should all be having in our giving circles and in the philanthropic ecosystem as a whole. We were just reflecting, all of us panelists, that how Angela Glover-Blackwell was sharing that giving circles really allow us to face what needs to be changed, and talking about class and having different experiences is really one of those. So throughout today's session, if you're live tweeting or sharing on your social story, please make sure to use the hashtag WeGiveSummit. We also encourage you to share feedback following this session. There's a really quick 2-question poll that's really helpful for us. And with that, I'm so thrilled to be sharing this stage with everybody today. And I'm going to introduce Alyssa Wright, the CEO of Wright Collective. She's also an incredible contributor to Forbes, who's written a ton of articles about giving circles and collective giving and Philanthropy Together and everybody. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Alyssa. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Isis. I'm so excited to be here. I'm tuning in today from the beautiful Abenaki lands in southern Maine. So really excited to be tuning in with you all and leading this panel with 3 individuals and leaders that I not only respect so much in their professional lives, but also in the way they live their values as humans and friends. So Nicole, Abraham, and Sarah, thank you so much for being here. I'm really pumped up for the next 45 minutes of conversation, and calling in a really exciting moment for the 3 of us to be radically honest about our experiences, and so set a tone, especially coming out of Vu and Angela's session, hearing their keynotes. I think it's time for us to get really honest about this space and how we drive more change across the country and across the world. So I wanted to open today to start this conversation up with, for those of you who are tuning in maybe for the first time to look at class, I wanted to give you a definition of it and just sort of a framing to think about it today. Class is the way in which we are perceived in society based on our economic and social status. And as you'll hear from our panelists today, it's also about much more than just wealth and economic and social status. It encompasses the intersections of all of our identities, and it really shapes our perception of self, community, and society, and is a real important thing for us to examine as we look at the collective giving movement and the giving circles, not only across the globe, but the ones in our own backyard that we're a part of. And I'll share with you just today to kind of kick it off on why this discussion was important for me personally. But I actually first became aware of class dynamics myself at a really early age. I grew up in rural Massachusetts. I was the scholarships kid at the school in town. Very frequently called a redneck, and often not invited to a lot of activities because I was told early on, can you afford that? Are you sure your family can participate in that? Maybe this is a better, place for you to be in this conversation. So growing up as someone working class poor, I really recognized early on when I started a career in the nonprofit sector and philanthropy that I really wanted to redefine what a philanthropist was. And because someone early on told me that rebellion was always an option, I decided that I would start claiming my philanthropy as often as I possibly could. And so it was interesting when I started to be, when asked to hold the mic or to be a part of the conversation or to sit at the table when I was only a $25 donor instead of a $25,000 donor, what the impact of that was and how it changed for me, how I arrived into the sector. So I share that with you today because I think that story and personal experiences are really important for us to talk about as we examine class dynamics, not only in the Giving Circle movement, but really across our country right now as we watch the rise of the billionaire class, a decline in middle class giving, and further just see a wealth divide amongst all of us. So today I'm ready for a very bold conversation. I want to welcome Sarah, Abraham, and Nicole to doing that alongside me. Thank you 3 so much for being here. And let's kick it off. Sarah, I'm going to call you in first to sort of answer this first question and share with all of us your class background and sort of how class has impacted your life overall to start.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. I'm so happy that you invited me to be a part of this space. Yeah, so I'm Sarah DeLuca. I live on Massachusetts and Pawtucket land, though I'm traveling right now. I'm not on that land right now. Yeah, I had a very different experience of class where I was kind of isolated from even thinking about class and thinking about anyone who wasn't the same class as me. I grew up upper middle class in a nice neighborhood. I went to parochial school, so everyone around me was pretty much a very similar class background. And it gave me the opportunity to, first off, just be completely isolated from other people who had different experiences than me. And I didn't know that that was a thing. It gave me the ability to be completely oblivious to things until much later into like college really was when I started thinking about class. But it also has given me a lot of choice. It's given me the ability to have access to whatever it is I wanted to go to college for. It wasn't a question of needing to find something that was going to make a lot of money. I was like, I've got a safety net, I'll be fine. And then after college, I could change jobs multiple times and not have to worry about student loans because I didn't have any student loans after college. So it gave me a lot of choices and flexibility in my life and things that I now reflect on and think about how can I make sure that everyone has access to explore, find their own path, and really the ability to find themselves and grapple with their own class background and find people that are coming from a diverse place. So it took me a while to get to where I am, but I'm very happy to be in this space and to be thinking about cross-class experiences.
And thank you, Sarah, for calling in just the need for self-reflection and sort of reflection overall on sort of your entire up until this moment and how class has impacted you. I know, Abraham, you have a similar story of the moments for you, and I'm wondering if you want to respond to the same question.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks, Alyssa, and all who are making this happen. In some ways similar to you, Sarah, but in other ways different. I grew up in Central Ohio, and I grew up in a somewhat I went to public school, and there was a quite wide range of class backgrounds of my peers and myself. But also I had an added layer of I thought I was middle class, but I was actually owning class. My parents kind of raised me to have certain values around being careful with money and not, just throwing money around and saving. And so working for money, all these values that I now recognize as like, there's a particular cultural strand that I've seen most in the Northeast United States amongst white liberals with a degree of class privilege. And so I had a sort of, I thought I was middle class, was secretly owning class. And as a result, I had a lot of entitlement, but it was impacted by the class background that I thought I had. So I had a lot of things that I would now place as like middle class entitlement. But the first real indication that I was not actually middle class to me was when it came time to apply for college, which you mentioned, Sarah, where my parents, who were very careful about spending money, told me that, wherever it is that I get into that I would like to go, that's where I should go. And I said, well, what about scholarships and financial aid? And they were very clear that like, this is really important. And thus showing and telling me that I should go where it is that I felt that I wanted to go. So underneath that was a new message that I hadn't gotten so clearly about the safety net that was there. And so since then, my whole life has been shaped by that. I'm now identify and understand that I'm owning class, and I'm learned my embodied experience of my body thinking that we're middle class now it's catching up to reality that I am owning class, and that shapes so much of what I can and can't do or say or believe or speak about. And so I'm learning to live into that. I guess that's enough for now.
Thank you, Abraham. And Nicole, the piece that Abraham just shared about living into it, I know for you, there's a lot of intersections on how you look at class. So I want to call you in to respond to the same question.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. So I know Alyssa from my time living in the Northeast, and now I live in Colorado, where I'm originally from. I live in Denver, which is the original land of the Arapaho people. And I think that for me, my experience of class is so much tied to my experience of my ethnic background. So I identify as Latino, and also my higher education attainment. So where I grew up in Colorado, it's Southern Colorado and Pueblo. I think when people think of Colorado, they think of ski resorts and big homes and affluence, and Pueblo is more in the desert. Over 50% of the population is Latino. It's known for being a very working class town with a steel mill. And my family, I think, I assume we grew up I grew up middle class. I don't really know. And I think I say that because I had food and a home, and I didn't have to go without. So I don't know, like, if we met the economic breakdown for it, but that felt sufficient enough for me to feel that I grew up middle class. However, because of like how I was seen in the town in which I grew up, there was still always a clear sense for me of like where I was allowed to go, where people like me ate, what kinds of jobs we held, where we vacation, even in terms of where we vacation in Colorado. You know, I'm going now in my late 30s, I'm going to places in Colorado that my family has never gone to before, because I think the underlying assumption that we don't do those types of recreation because of our ethnic background, i.e. class background. And when I moved to the Northeast, and then I had obtained higher education, and also living in an area where there were people who were less familiar with like the group of Latinos that I come from, I think that it was as if like my class background changed. Like I felt that I had, like I was slingshotting my way from one class to another. Like I think I started to be perceived as coming from like upper middle class. My friendship group was more upper middle class. I think based on the school that I attended and probably the places that I lived, people made a lot of assumptions about me. And it was like I was the same person, but I had completely different identity experiences based on the time in my life and where I was living. And so I think now my experience is very mixed. It's really cool for me to be back in Colorado, where there are a lot of people like me, so I don't have to always explain like where I come from. My family is the mix of the indigenous people and the Spanish colonizers, and we've lived in these parts since this was Mexico. So I feel like I have a much fuller experience. I can be more myself. And I think there's more subtlety in terms of how I understand my class background.
Thank you for sharing, Nicole. I want to just reflect back hearing from the three of you, and we'll bring it back to kind of giving circles next and talk a little bit about how these dynamics play out in philanthropy and collaborative giving. But hearing you share reminds me of kind of this through line we're all talking about how education changed us, right, in some capacity. And so again, even though I grew up working class, I remember when the opportunity came to go to college, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm filling out all the paperwork. I'm trying to navigate this space. Like I'm going to be articulate and educated because I didn't want people to know where I came from. So I was like, that was kind of my first like step out of it. And I remember, you know, kind of like that denial when I joined my first giving circle, actually towards the end of my college experience. And I remember joining it, and afterwards there were a bunch of folks that went out to eat, and it was kind of a mix of different generations in the group. And I remember being really aware of my class background because they picked a restaurant where like the average plate was like $25. And I was like, I'm sorry, like, can we go somewhere where like I can get like of $5. Can we go to Subway? Like, is that an option? But I remember kind of feeling like, even though I was in this really collaborative kind of like giving group that was supporting like local social service groups, I remember feeling that some of the things that happened outside the giving circle kept reminding me of my class and created really uncomfortable dynamics for me. And so I want to transition us to, how these class dynamics play out, what both of you see. And Nicole, maybe I can just stick with you for this question, in philanthropy more broadly, in giving and collaborations. And what does it really mean, like, for those of us who are a part of it, even though, transactionally, I loved how Angela said in the previous keynote about this idea of transformational solidarity in this work and not just the transaction. How does it play out beyond just, the dynamics of giving in the giving circle? There's all those small silent moments, like some of the ones I just mentioned. So, kind of want to hear from you a little bit more about what you were saying about assumptions.
Sure. So I've been part of a number of different giving circles, all, in different configurations. And I would say one notable example that stands out to me was when I was part of a giving circle that was aimed at young philanthropists. So these are folks that were, I think at the time, the age cutoff was 40. And we had piloted this program where we would each do a monthly donation. And over the course of the year, we made a sizable contribution to the organization. What was really fascinating about the experience is I think initially people thought, oh, this young philanthropist group, like, how much money will they raise? Like, young people don't have money. Like, there's all of these reasons why millennials may be cash strapped. And we found out that, based on like sort of the giving history of other donors for the organization, that many of the young philanthropists who were working class folks, they were donating at the same rate as elected officials or prominent people in the community. When I first saw that, first I was like a little upset, like, I can't believe that these people with more status aren't giving more money. And then I think it just started to make a lot of sense to me based on, my experience and what I see with my peers, which is that for a lot of millennials who give, we give as a method of like direct action. It's a representation of our values. And even if we don't have a lot of money, I know the people that were part of this giving circle, many of them probably earned, I would guess, under $50,000 a year, and were donating at the rate that people with 100+ incomes were giving. Now, I think that is that assumption that we will give based off of our values is one that really could be seized. And there's a great way in which I think our generation, millennials, are really starting to meld together our values with our giving in a powerful way.
I was so excited when the Philanthropy Together folks shared with us that the majority of folks attending this summit and participating, I think, are between 18 and 45. And so I think there is a generational piece to it. I appreciate you naming that. And I wonder, Sarah, if you also kind of want to comment on what you're seeing. And I just want to share too that some of Sarah's work is being an advisor, being a philanthropic advisor. So working with clients and folks. And so I'm really curious, both personally and professionally, a little bit of what you're seeing when it comes to philanthropy more broadly.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that who is a philanthropist? And there's a lot of people that are shying away from that word to begin with because they're like, oh, that's not me. That's some, Mackenzie Gates, or I'm sorry, Mackenzie Scott or somebody, or the Gates Foundation. Like, those are those people. That's not me. And we're always comparing ourselves to that other sort of level that seems unattainable. But thinking about how anybody can be a philanthropist at whatever level, I really appreciate what you said earlier, Alyssa, about that. And also just seeing how we don't know people's situation until you actually get to know them. Kind of what Nicole was saying about young philanthropists coming together and realizing that they're actually pretty generous and they get the idea of living their values and maybe stretching something that feels a lot more meaningful to them than what some of the older generations that they've seen. Giving $100 when you only have $1,000 is a lot more meaningful than someone who has $1 million giving $100. And so just recognizing that no matter what level people are giving and just getting to know the people, again, moving beyond that transactional, like you gave $100, so you get X, Y, and Z, you know, swag and poise and all of this great stuff, when it could be, you know, no matter what people are giving, we should be treating all donors the same.
Completely. And Abraham, I know you have some sort of tangible, you know, some anecdotes and stories that relate to this discussion too, of what you've seen play out in more of these giving circle philanthropy spaces around class.
Yeah, I mean, part of the quote unquote advantages of being a rich white man is that anything less than starting with humility seems like a really bad idea. So one of the things I can offer here is some stories that bring me to a place of humility. Because I think when we're talking about transformation, in my experience, without humility and sincerity, transformation isn't open to me. And so, you know, I like to look at things assuming that the experiences I go through are invitations to initiation to something that I might not even know what it is yet. But that the things I go through are ingredients of possible initiation into something deeper and towards my highest expression of myself. So some of those points, if that were the case, would be my college choice, like I said, where I was able to choose whatever college would accept me. Another point in this larger ceremony, if it's happening, is the first real time I tried to do something radical with my giving. I was a teacher, a middle school teacher, and I had just been coming into realization that I had access to money beyond what I needed and money that could do good in the world. And so to start with just a dipstick into my level of awareness as a new philanthropist who really cared, truly cared, was I'm smart, I had lots of ideas, I was passionate about things, but I want to set the dipstick of where I was starting from around philanthropy in class. I decided that my classroom should get a class set of Chromebooks. This was back when that was like a big deal. And I invested $10,000 in buying a class set of Chromebooks. I did not consult with anyone. I did not ask anyone, my students. I did not ask the families of the students I worked with. I did not ask the other teachers. I talked to the principal because I needed their permission, but I kept it as secret as possible. And I just did it. And boom, we had a class full of Chromebooks. Whew. I look back at that and I feel such humility about how, and I was doing my best. That was the best, and I really cared. I mean, I was willing to invest 10,000 freaking dollars in it, but I still did this action that with zero consultation. And now I've been on this whole journey to transform the whole way that I even think about using resources that I have access to. And I'm proud to say today that I am doing some major giving through a relationship that I'm in with a colleague who is doing amazing work, who's a working class woman of color doing work supporting care worker movements. And because of our relationship, I have been able to move into a flow funding model in collaboration with her, with community members witnessing and being a part, because the power dynamics are so intense. But it feels so distant from that bold action I took long ago, where I bought those Chromebooks, so isolated, such a cold, it feels so cold, like to think of, not in a bad way, but just like by myself in my classroom, making decisions and nobody else there. So that's one thing. And yeah, I guess that I'll probably hold off. That's enough for now.
I think it's such a great story, Abraham. I'm just, not to go back to my earlier giving circle experience at 20 years old of not getting choice and where we went to eat as a giving circle group in the town that I was living in. But it's kind of the same thing, right? Like there's a lot of those, there was no community practice, there was no democratizing decision making. It was just sort of like, okay, this is what we do, and sort of a tone set from the top down. So I'm hoping that Giving Circle leaders and folks that are kind of shaping these groups have some takeaways from today on, how are other elements of your Giving Circle practice and community also taking into account, the folks that are giving from $20 to $2,000 to, pay, to participate in the collaborative giving process. I'm curious, Nicole or Sarah, any responses to the necessity for that community piece and what you've seen playing out a little bit more broadly? I'm curious, Sarah, maybe in some of your professional work too, since I know you're working more with high net worth folks and individuals that are, thinking really deeply about this.
Yeah, I can say a little bit. And I know, Abraham, I've heard you shared that story a little bit in the past, and it still gets me because I know that feeling of, I am a privileged white person. I have an answer. I'll do the great thing because I am going into that sort of like white savior mentality of like, I can do this for my people and I don't need to ask anybody for permission. I just know that I'm right because that's how I've been brought up. So I totally hear that. And I think it's a story that many folks who have wealth and class privilege have probably examples similar to that. Yeah, as somebody saying in the chat, like the arrogance of that. And I think it takes some time, and hopefully we don't all have to make that mistake ourselves before we learn how to build relationships, build community.
Please let everyone not have to make that same mistake.
No Chromebook mistakes.
I mean, I've definitely made my share of mistakes like that too, where I was like, oh, I can do so much good because I have these resources. But really being able to step back, and I think doing things with Giving Circles gives us that great opportunity to be in a cross-class space, to be in a community where you're talking about how you're giving, where you're giving, making those decisions together in a democratic way that's not just this top-down, I am a wealthy person who knows what's best for people. It's so liberating, and also, yeah, it's just freeing. Like, I don't need to be responsible for all of the decision making. And I've seen that journey with a lot of my clients, with myself, with my friends, all sorts of folks. So I hope that this is going to inspire more people to go straight into doing Giving Circles and doing things in a collaborative way. I'm seeing a lot more of that with millennials that I work with.
And Nicole, I don't know if you want to respond, because I know you do a lot around kind of philanthropic education. Like, what's the role in this space in terms of shifting the narrative? I think that's a huge thing to think about. And Sarah, you just spoke to that a little bit, of the importance of learning and listening and how key that is for all of us.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the Giving Circles that I participated in was active in the grant reviewing process. And I think that that's really the area where I started to observe that the educational piece would really make an impact. So you have folks that are donating, and then they're reviewing the applications. Many of them have very little knowledge of even really the nonprofit sector. So it's kind of their first pass at looking at financial statements, or sort of the expectations around polishing and narrative, and then also the actual areas at which where the organizations are working. And so what I felt in that process is that there's such a great opportunity to educate the donors so that there's more humility and I guess a better chance at leveling the playing field by having a better understanding of what these organizations are facing when they come forward to seek the application. And I think that it's still it's extremely imperfect still. Professionally, I work and doing foundation grant writing, and I can see that. I can see the leg up that an organization that can even employ an outside grant writer has in putting forward their best materials. And so, for Giving Circles, if we can use that as an opportunity to educate donors, I think that's a great next step in being able to ensure that we're starting to work more in solidarity and breaking down this huge divide that often exists between the donor and the grantee.
We have this conversation, I know we've had it over the years, Nicole, of like, so who and how, like who's the messenger to do that philanthropic education piece? And it's interesting to me hearing you talk today, because I do feel like, and I'm wondering which of the three of you would like to respond to this. But I think, you know, we're in, I'm looking at the comments coming in the chat, like we're all in solidarity around this. Yes, moving forward. But then there's a moment of like speaking truth to power, and who calls who emails who sits down with who says, hey, guess what? If you want all this reporting, we need an extra $20,000 added to this grant because that's extra labor. So I'm just curious, like anyone have any, do the three of you have any moments to share around that, or any advice for folks of kind of how do we make this, how do we activate this? Because yes, in theory, we know all these things need to change, but who delivers the pushback? How can you start the conversation? And sort of how do we sort of set that tone of humility and understanding, and like, let's, you know, as Vu, I think, said in the previous session, you know, really move forward together to get the work done. Like we have to get work done. So I don't know which of you would like to respond to that.
I can say a little bit, and I bet others have ideas too. One of the things I've come to realize about myself is just kind of taking ownership over the place that I hold in the world, and that I do show up. I am token nice white lady, and I can show up in spaces as that nice white lady who shows up with wealthy people around other funders. And because I'm able to be in a lot of those spaces, I'm also able to speak up in those spaces, and say the thing that we're thinking, say the thing that other people are thinking and maybe don't feel brave enough or comfort enough or safe enough to say something. But I can be sometimes the agitator in the room because I know I have the safety net of what I look like, of how I show up in these spaces, of I'm not there on somebody else's dime where I could lose my job by saying things like, we have to move a lot more money and we need to move past the 5% that foundations are giving. Sort of echoing the things that Vu was saying in the keynote earlier. And so I'm able to be in spaces with other nice white ladies to really speak up about that and bring them along and sort of like open the door and coax them gently. Come along with me, come do philanthropy a different way. And so I see that as a lot of my role, just because of my own privilege and access.
I want to thank you for naming that too, because if, you know, if folks are kind of leaving today, I think a simple action they could take is, you know, especially for, you know, for us, Sarah, you know, invite another white lady to be a part of a giving circle, right? It's like, join it, commit to it, show up on Thursday nights from 7 to 8 p.m. You can do it. Like if you have to go on mute, like that's okay. We don't mind, like nourish and nosh and take care of your kids, whatever we need, you know, need to make happen. But I think a lot of people, you know, don't necessarily open the invitation to say like, this is actually really important. You know, you need to be a part of philanthropy for the times that we're living in. And again, it's part of helping people see your identity as a philanthropist too.
And be discomfort, like sit in your own discomfort. And it's okay if you want to talk to me afterwards and process your own feelings. We can do that. I'm here for you.
Yeah, totally. Abraham, any comments or reflections on this, like shifting the narrative piece? And I know you have another anecdote as well that I think is really relevant and good for folks to hear around these dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that the degree of challenge for, you know, I'm thinking for wealthy white people, which is not, I know, but like I'm thinking of wealthy white people. So the degree of challenge that I face in transformation on a spiritual level would be parallel to the degree of challenge that Black people or Indigenous people would face trying to build economic like autonomy around land and access to material wealth. Because if either of those collapses, the economic order doesn't work. If the spiritual condition of wealthy white people transforms, it upsets the entire economic order. So I don't want to be surprised that trying to engage with that as a wealthy white person, that I'm going to hit, like I'm going to over and over hit obstacles to my transformation. it makes systemic sense. So I guess in terms of like, what are we positioned to do in the rooms where decisions happen? I first want to look at, have I faced the pushback from within? Like, do I even know my own story well enough to go into that room with other rich white men and take a stand? If I don't know my own story well enough, the way that I do that can still be operating in the same mindset where it's me by myself. I'm going to save the day. I'm the one who's going to interrupt. And so the need to really understand, why would I push back against my own stated goals? I say I want equity and philanthropy, and yet my actions time and time again show that maybe I'm not ready for it. So what is the resistance coming from within that manifests in my actions and words? But when I'm there, I come from a place of sincerity. And that, to me, like, being sincere is so hard with privilege. But finding the place where it's my humanity is at stake, I become very sincere. I love, there's this essay called Tracing the Crater with Your Fingers in the Nighttime. It's written by a man named Tad Hargrave to white people. He compares like the white colonizer existence to being in like a spiritual crater. Like, it's just an explosion happened there. It's burnt, it's smoldering, it's not alive. And if we try and climb out of the crater, we just make it bigger. We crumble the walls and the crater becomes bigger. And it actually takes sitting in the crater and being with the reality that we're in a spiritual crater, and that the grief can come forth. So for me, space for grieving how ignorant I am, how ignorant I have been and still am, and will always be to so many things that aren't my fault, but I'm ignorant to them. So to make space to grieve that no amount of willpower, no amount of effort is actually going to free me from my ignorance. It's a done deal. And so then I have space to grieve that I'll always be calibrating. I'm always going to be calibrating and recalibrating because of my openness to confusion as a rich white man. And that's really where I'm motivated by the idea of paying it backwards. I like the idea of paying it backwards. It's like, who are the people who support me to step into my highest manifestation, my best self? Who are those people who across time have done that? How can I support them? Because if I support them, I already have data that tells me that I'll be supported. So if I just go and support them, it's kind of like a win-win-win sort of situation. And that's what I call support genius. And it also creates a situation where you could have wealthy people going to the people they want to fund. And that's the model I'm working on. It's like, I want to go to the people that I want to fund and ask them to be in relationship with me. Like, is this something you would engage with me in? And so being able to show up with a different dynamic than, I am the rich person. You may approach me. You may approach me. I'm done with that. I don't want that. So I'm done.
I remember one time, Abraham, you're making me think of, I went to an opening of it was a group that was thinking about doing some giving around COVID-19 when the pandemic first erupted. And I remember we all joined the Zoom room, and the speaker who opened it said something along the lines of like, all right, we're gonna move money and we're gonna fix things. And I was like, I don't think this is the group that I really wanna, who are we helping? Who are we talking to? What's going on? But I think it's that same mentality, right? And I just so appreciate, and I also want to call in what I think all three of you have touched on, but Abraham, you just shared, which is this idea that, and I think this is also part of just for me as I've kind of navigated class dynamics my whole life, but there is a spiritual component to it too. I'm of a different class now than I was when I was raised, and I've had to stay on a certain spiritual path to also think about that and think about the role that wealth and money play in my life. And I feel like if you don't do that type of self-reflection and you show up wounded or not healed or not prepared for those dialogues and to be a part of the process, it also can do more harm than you realize. So I just want to thank you for naming that too. I want to, we're going to open up to Q&A. So please pepper the chat with some questions while we do this last sort of question of the day with these awesome folks that we have. All right, I'm going to turn to you, Nicole, first. How about some advice? I know that we collaborated together on starting a giving circle. I'm curious for folks that are just stepping in, what is your advice to them? And then also anything else you want to share a reflection from today?
Sure. So I would say, of the various giving circles I've been in, the one that I liked the most and thought would be a great model to replicate is creating a giving circle for a specific organization. And what I like about that is it really gives you the opportunity, sort of like what Abraham was sharing, to build a relationship with the organization. So you can really learn about the issue, learn about, maybe the challenges that organization is facing. You can become educated to serve as an ambassador, which raises awareness of the issue that they might be working on in addition to the fundraising. And I think it really helps, the nonprofit to feel that you're able to contribute to them without them creating an opportunity for you to contribute to them, if that makes sense. So while I think, volunteering is excellent, and I have also been a great volunteer in many organizations, oftentimes you see situations where a group will approach an organization and say, can you give us a one-day thing to do? And it just feels like such a, touch and go kind of way of managing the relationship. And what would be so much better, I think, is like, let's give you a small amount of money sustained over a period of time, really get to know you, and like that lasting relationship. I think that could be so powerful. So that would be my advice, thinking about starting a giving circle. I think one of the previous speakers talked about being proximate. I really like that idea. Like hone in close to the organizations that you're near and in your community and start there.
I love it. Sarah, I know from your work in the world, it'd be great for maybe you to chime in a little bit around, a prospective leader who's thinking about starting up something as well. Kind of what when someone's in the startup mindset for this space, what do you feel is important?
Yeah. I think this is another example of like, learn from my mistakes. I suffer from impatience a lot of times. And kind of piggybacking off of what Nicole said, it's about moving at the speed of trust. It's gonna take time to build up a intentionally cross-class space to build a giving circle in the first place. And so take the time to actually do that. One of my mentors, I have this actually on my desk. I have a sticky note that says this: efficiency is the antithesis of equity. Efficiency is the antithesis of equity. And so as much as we want to get far, we need to really be slow and intentional in building something. So making time for building those relationships, for getting to know each other, for understanding our own class backgrounds, and being open and transparent so that we can deepen those relationships and build something lasting that's not just like checked off, okay, we're done, but really build that and make time for the discomfort and the open discussion that's going to come, and it'll work out in the end, but we need to put the time in.
I love that. Efficiency is the antithesis of equity. I feel like that's my next tattoo. That needs to go somewhere.
Right?
Yeah, that is like going on my calf and being shown at the beach this summer. That's awesome. I love that. Moving at the speed of trust. Abraham, what about for you? I'm curious, sort of a golden nugget of wisdom to leave with folks today.
Yeah, I mean, Nicole and Sarah are getting at it. There's no substitute for actual relationships. And I would actually say to Sarah, what you just said, it's like efficiency is the opposite of equity. Because when they say efficiency, they don't mean efficiency like I mean it. In my experience, the most efficient way to make significant lasting change is to form relationships with people. And I would reclaim efficiency and say that is efficient. It's inefficient when we start moving right for certain goals and metrics that we've come in not even consulting with anybody. That's inefficient. That wastes time and energy. We don't have time. We have to go slow. And relationships are how we do it. So for me, I think a nugget I want to offer is I'm trying to not develop my brain to be the fastest brain at analyzing power and privilege, and so that I can like calculate everything. My brain is still quite low capacity for doing a lot of those things. But if I can develop better instincts about power and privilege, so that I just find myself making moves and speaking and taking action and refraining from action in ways that afterwards you might come up to me and say, hey, you know, when you did that, that was really smart because, and then we can analyze it. But I would say, oh, I guess you're right. But I didn't get there through thinking. So I just really want to encourage folks like me who are taught to try to be brainiacs, that I think it's as much about instincts and honing our instincts. And the only way humans can hone instincts is in relationship. That's how instincts get changed. And so I really want to add on to what Nicole and Sarah are saying. If you are putting yourself in situations where over time you're able to build trusting relationships by leading with vulnerability in particular, as if you're wealthy, that is the way towards a different future.
Thank you all so much. I feel right before we transition to Q&A, I just want to name that I'm definitely going to type these up and add them as a resource page after today's panel, all these amazing golden nuggets of wisdom that the three of you just shared. So thank you. And I also wanted to just share, I know that Sarah Lomelin, the head of Philanthropy Together, was just recently interviewed. And one of the things that she said that I think kind of goes back to what you all just shared is this idea of deep relational work, because we need to be able to work across differences, viewpoints, and ideologies, but most people don't get the chance to practice. And so that's why I think the Giving Circle movement is so important. And I know all three of you personally as well. I know you model that like in your own life. I know that you are going at a pace that it can be frustrating sometimes, because I think we all want to see change, but social change takes time. And it takes relationships, and that doesn't happen quickly. And so I know that the three of us will be talking a decade from now, because we'll still be moving in the same direction. And so I just want to honor that and thank you for being a part of this dialogue today and staying in the work. And then a couple questions we have in the chat, just to kind of, let me see what we have so far. For Giving Circles who have never discussed class, do you have a question that could help the circle start this conversation openly? Any ideas on prompts or activities or questions to start it up?
Can you say it again, Alyssa?
Yeah, for Giving Circles who have never discussed class openly, do you have a question that could help the circle start this conversation?
Resource generation, young progressive wealthy people's group, organizing group, was really instrumental for me in teaching me how to have what we call money talk or money stories. And that has been tremendously helpful. And it's not that complex. They can take many different shapes, but just being willing to explicitly tell a story of how my relationship to money has been over time. And that through that, if we create a space where we're setting some limits on how people are responding to me, because that's going to be very vulnerable. But so I think there is some degree of like knowledge about creating the container for people to tell it. But by me, I can offer leadership by telling my story, my honest story, vulnerably in a container where it can be held and not dissected and questioned and all that. But that is leadership that is you can't fake that. And it's more powerful in my experience than any other type of leadership move that I could make to encourage people to talk about something that feels as explosive as class, especially for rich people.
Nicole, do you have any thoughts or reflections? I know on starting up a couple circles, what's been helpful in the first opening sessions of that?
That's really a tough question. I was trying to scan my mind to think if I've ever had that discussion, actually. And I think maybe some of it comes from the fact that I was definitely like phase shifting depending on the space. And I I don't know if I ever felt vulnerable enough in the giving circles that I was in to talk openly about my class background, which is probably also why I tried to find then similar groups. Like I did the pre-filtering to then place myself in a group where I could have that type of vulnerable conversation. So I don't know, I'd have to think more about it, but I can't explain why I probably haven't had that type of conversation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I can just lift up, jump in. I know I've seen Betsy in the chat, but Class Action has some great resources as well. They're a fantastic organization that can either lead trainings or point you in the direction of some resources to start having these conversations. But yes, starting from a place of trust where people are comfortable actually opening up and sharing their class is the first step.
Yeah, and use today. I mean, over 120 people came to today's conversation. Say, I heard Abraham talk about this, or Nicole, or Sarah, or Alyssa. And use this as fuel to the fire of having those dialogues when you get back into your groups after today. So I just want to thank all three of you again. We have several questions in the chat that I think we can move the conversation to Whova. So I hope that you'll all find the four of us there and keep the dialogue going. Thank you so much, Abraham, Nicole, and Sarah, for being a part of this today. And let's just keep the conversation going. I'll hand it off to you, Isis.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Alyssa.
all.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, Abraham, Nicole, Sarah. This was incredible. There's so many nuggets of wisdom. Somebody's going to put in a 2-question poll. Please answer that before you pop off. This is really helpful for us as we gather feedback for future We Give Summit. So thank you all so much. This is just, I really can't wait to go back to this recording. Our next session in just 8 minutes is At the Root, Giving Circles and Structural Change, with the incredible Melissa Walker talking about advocacy and how giving circles can really do that systemic work that we're all talking about from the last 2 sessions. So I hope you join us 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. You don't want to miss it. And over the next few days, again, this recording will be live in Whova in the next 48 hours. So see you later today. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.